Good evening all and welcome. Tonight for your listening pleasure I have a chilling collection of scary stories that happened while people used Ouija boards. If you would like some cool extra perks and a shout out on your birthday, feel free to check out the link in the description to Patreon. But for now it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I've been using Ouija boards since I was 12. I know how that sounds, but for me it was never a game. I was raised to be respectful with spiritual things. I don't ask about death, I don't joke around. I only use the board with people who take it seriously. Always have. The board I usually use is my own. It's a bit worn, but it's mine, and it's been cleansed more times than I can count. But a while back, I lent mine to a friend for a while, and, needing one, I borrowed another board from someone else. That was probably my first mistake. At first, nothing seemed off. I used it a few times, nothing unusual, just slow, vague responses. But months later, I brought it out again with my boyfriend and another close friend. We lit a few candles, grounded ourselves, and started the session as usual. But from the beginning, the planchette felt off. The spirit that came through didn't behave like anything I'd ever contacted before. It was sarcastic, mocking, and it used terms like lol and ha-ha, as if it were amused by the whole thing. And the way it spelled words, gibberish at times, felt deliberate, like it was trying to make us repeat nonsense back to it. At one point it spelled a name that I couldn't even begin to pronounce. I said it out loud anyway just to try. The response? Laughter. That sent a shiver through me. I ended the session properly, said goodbye and cleansed the board. But the vibe lingered, and it nagged at me. I remember the friend who owned the board telling me something strange happened to her with it, so I called her. As soon as I described the mocking tone and the gibberish name, she cut me off, and said that she had encountered something similar, different name, but with the same attitude. She agreed to come over that night, and we decided to take precautions. We painted protective runes on our faces, a little ritual we've both learned to take seriously, and I had a gut feeling that this thing, whatever it was, wanted more than just attention. That night, we started another session together just to see if we could get answers, or maybe formally sever the connection. The board lit up fast. The entity came through without hesitation, and the first thing it spelled? Let me out. And then, play. We responded politely, told it we'd think about it, and tried to keep the tone neutral so that it wouldn't get angry. It knew we weren't going to say yes, and that's when things went sideways. The planchette jerked hard. It spun in fast, chaotic circles under our fingers, moving with such force that our wrists seized up. The board turned cold. It was freezing, like putting your hands on a block of ice. My fingertips went numb. We tried to end the session, but it wouldn't let us. Only on the third attempt did we finally manage to force a goodbye. We cleansed the board again and put it back in its box, and for a while that was it. The air in my apartment returned to normal. Nothing strange, no nightmares, no whispering shadows in the hallway, and I let myself forget about it. But 8 months later, a different friend asked if she could borrow the board for a get-together. I warned her, told her to cleanse it thoroughly and leave it in the sun. I even told her that something might be stuck on the board. Not a spirit, not exactly. A trickster. But she brushed it off. That night, before they even touched the board, it cracked. Not through the wood, thankfully, just the painted surface. A split right across the upper left corner. She called me after, said 2 of them got dizzy and nauseous almost immediately, and that 1 had to lie down. The board gave them nothing useful, just random letters and nonsense words, and they end the session, unsettled. Since then, it stayed at my friend's apartment. She hasn't dared bring it back, but now she's the one experiencing things. It started small, footsteps in the hallway when no one else was home, the TV flipping channels on its own, lights flickering. At first it was just once or twice, then rapidly, strobing like something out of a horror movie. The Wi-Fi will cut out at random, there'll be cold spots, shadows. But the worst part was she saw something. A silhouette standing in her bedroom doorway, with a crooked posture just watching. She can't sleep with the door open anymore. And then came the music box. It's this old beat-up toy she's had she was a kid. Broken for 10 years and it hadn't made a sound in ages. But now out of nowhere it plays. Not constantly, not even when anyone's near it. Just 3 times so far from inside a storage box in the back of her closet. But always at night. The same night she told me about it. I sent a photo of her apartment to another friend, someone sensitive. She didn't know any of the context but messaged me back within minutes. There's a shadow figure standing in the hallway near her room. She described it exactly. The slouch, the darkness, the way it watched. I've read a lot of stories about how to get rid of Ouija boards. Burn it? That's supposedly the worst thing you can do. Some say to bury it in a cemetery or wrap it in a black cloth and salt. Others say throwing it into running water. I don't know what to believe, but I do know this. Something is attached to that board, and it's not just annoying or mischievous, it's intelligent. It provokes, mimics, and follows. It's not malevolent in a traditional demonic sense, but it wants something, be it attention, energy, permission, maybe all of them. I don't want it in my life anymore, and neither does my friend. But what do we do? How do you safely lock something like this away? If anyone has had something similar happen, please let me know what worked for you. We're listening. Years ago, myself, my best friend, another friend, and 3 girls were all at one of the girls' houses for Halloween. We were just going to spend the afternoon/evening chilling and watching horror movies. But during the afternoon, the girl whose house it was said she owned a Ouija board and that we could play that. All 3 girls were really excited to do it. Oddly enough, my best friend was quite superstitious and very reluctant. Myself and my other friend were kind of skeptical and indifferent to doing it, but deemed it pointless. Even more so when she brought it out, and it was some crappy thing she made herself with bits of old wood and marker pen, and she brought along one of her dad's whiskey glasses as a planchette. The thing is, we were teenagers, and we fancied these girls, so we wanted to do something to impress them. My superstitious friend still wanted no part of it, but the other 5 of us began playing. The grimly predictable happens, and it starts spelling things like show boobs, almost as if one of the guys, my friend unsurprisingly, was forcing the glass when we had our fingers on it. Me and the other guy found this hilarious. The girls, however, got irritated that we weren't taking it seriously. So we agreed to do it properly, but after a bit of random twitching, it starts going 5, no, 6, yes, repeatedly. We took this as a sign to mean that it wanted the guy who wasn't participating to join in. Note, everyone said at the time and afterwards that they weren't forcing it. The rational part of me assumes they were. but I'm not sure. After much persuasion, the third guy joins us. Again, there's a period of a few random letters or twitching, nothing coherent. Then it starts repeating a sequence of 3 letters and some numbers over and over again. Suddenly the guy that joined last jumps back. Out of instinct we all do the same, and the glass falls over and is steamed up with a cross scratched on the inside. The girls begin freaking out. I explained the glass is obviously steamed up because we'd just spent however long with 6 sweaty teenage hands on a cold upturned glass. It's called condensation and is far from supernatural. The cross was probably pre-existing in the glass, dishwasher scratches or something like that we hadn't noticed before this but became more apparent when the glass steamed up. Anyway, Guy 3 is now very quiet, definitely not playing again, so we stick on a movie instead. Shortly after, he goes home, clearly not his usual self. The next day he calls me to ask if I'll go somewhere with him. We get the train a few towns over, and he explains on the way. I knew prior to any of this that his dad had run out on him and his mum when he was a baby, and he had no contact with that side of the family, knowing only who they were from photo albums. On the journey, he fills in the gaps. His surname is obviously his dad's. His parents were married, now divorced, and he never changed it to his mum's. His middle name was a family tradition on his dad's side, and he had an uncle who died in a motorcycle crash a few weeks before he was born. He knew nothing but his first name about the accident, from going through photos with his mum. Oh, that's your uncle whatever, he died just before you were born. Anyway, the 3 letters were his uncle's initials. It took him a while of them repeating to click, but obviously at some point the sequence containing 2 of his 3 initials registered, and it hit. The third one was his uncle's first name. He asked his mum when he got home, but she had little to add that he didn't already know, and we were now on the train on our way to the cemetery, to where his uncle was buried, so he could see if it made any sense with the numbers. His mum knew of the cemetery from the funeral, but since the divorce hadn't been there. He had never been there. Note, at this point, the steam and the cross, the bits everyone else found spookiest, I was sure were as per my explanation, and maintained this stance to this day despite the next part. I was now thinking maybe everyone else was in on it. Maybe he'd been more curious about his dad's side of the family now he was older, had visited the grave recently, and they had all conspired to try and frighten me. One of, if not all the others, forcing the 5 no 6 yes bit. Him reluctantly joining in. The steam/cross, still as my explanation, was just a fortunate coincidence. And now we were on our way to some pre-planned big reveal at the graveyard, which would apparently scare my pants off. So we get to the graveyard, wander around for ages trying to find the grave, and eventually find it, and the mysterious string of numbers that followed the 3 letters were the chapter and verse of 2 biblical inscriptions on the stone. I have to admit that were I not already in on their little scheme, it would have been pretty clever. I turned to my friend to high-five him and compliment him on what would have been a very clever ruse had I not figured it out. To just see him sitting on the grass staring at the grave and then start to cry. Literally, sitting there with tears streaming down his cheeks. Now this guy can lie, he can prank, and my rationalization of everything anyone claims to be supernatural would make me the gold standard target for a spooky Halloween prank. But one thing he can't do is act. He was obviously and genuinely sad. I just went and sat by him. We sat there for ages, and then just went home in silence. This was in the mid-90s. He's still my best friend. Randomly over the years, I pester him to do another Ouija board with me as I'm curious now. and he's the only one I've ever had anything vaguely resembling a result from, but he always declines. He won't talk about what happened, not as in the silent treatment, but just tries to change the subject. However, not long after that event, he did start to track down that side of his family, and recently reconciled with his father, and met his half-brothers, etc. Maybe, in the end, it was his uncle, trying to get him to reconnect with his family. My mum always told me never to play with Ouija boards, but I was a stupid teenager. I was nuts because we didn't actually have a board. My friend just knew how to draw one out, so we got a paper board. She drew it out, and we made the makeshift planchette. She explained how it all worked, so we sat around, the three of us, and we began playing. I automatically assumed one of my girlfriends was moving it around, because it was moving around pretty smoothly and answered all of our questions clearly. That's what I always assume when I heard about people playing. It wasn't till it said something that really creeped us out that we started getting mad at each other. We were asking the usual questions teenage girls would ask. Who would lose their virginity first? It told us what order, at what ages, and the names of the guys. Honestly, it was so descriptive it almost seemed real, but it was strange. The one girlfriend who was religious and really controlled by her parents was allegedly the one who would lose it first. At the time, it made no sense. Said I would lose it last and the other girl in the middle. Then we asked would we get married. It said who would, but it didn't say the partners' names. It did say who would get divorced and who would have kids or not. It said the one girl that was religious would never get married. The other girl would and divorced, and I would get married but not. I guess all the questions and answers were just entertaining, but kind of starting to rub the wrong way. No feelings were getting hurt. It was weird. One of them then asked if we would be friends forever. The whatever it was we said no. Two of them would be friends, but they wouldn't be friends with me anymore. And I remember getting upset. I looked up, not wanting to remove hands. We were all confused, discussing who's moving it, and we all were scared. We all swore that none of us were moving it at that moment. We were all kind of pissed about things that were being said because it was offending every single one of us in some way at this point. It was that moment. I knew I wasn't moving it, and I knew they wouldn't lie about it, but it was too strange. Everything was getting so detailed and strange, it was almost insulting. We ended up asking it to say something that would prove it was real. Something that only it knew that we didn't. It said the following. Bruce was cheating on his wife, Kelly, and they'd get a divorce. Who the heck is Bruce and Kelly? It just kept repeating itself, so we kind of ignored it and moved on. As teenagers, we didn't really care about people getting divorced. What it said next really sent us into a tizzy though. Among all the questions we were asking, after we knew it wasn't us moving it, we looked back down the board and didn't say anything. It just started to move. It asked, did we want to know something? We asked what, and it followed with, do you want to know when you're going to die? We got so freaked out we just pulled our hands off immediately, which I know we're not supposed to do. At that point we were screaming and not thinking clearly. We got the attention of some of our other friends that were in different sections of the basement, and they came over to ask what was going on. There were 2 other friends who were dating and doing God knows what. It was why we banished ourselves to that part of the basement to play this game. Her mum was upstairs, and it was the only way they could be alone together if we were all together. We were using candles. They were doing stuff over on the other side and wanted the lights dim. They were playing music, so they didn't really hear what was going on until we freaked out. We did explain what happened to the couple. He wanted to play because he thought it was badass and literally had to talk us in by taunting us. He said it was all fake. It's almost like our egos got the best of us, and we thought how scared we were because we wanted to prove that it was real and knew strange things. When we went back to playing, her boyfriend played, but not her. She was freaked out and went upstairs. Immediately, he said, prove you're real and do something. This should have been the sign that we stopped. It said, get her to play and come back down. We need more energy for something to happen. So her boyfriend yelled, she opened the door, and he persuaded her to come down and he begged her to play. She relented, but she played. It just asked us to put our hands on the pointer and wait. I remember time had gone on, and we would say, "How much longer?" It got to the point where our hands were falling asleep. We'd kind of forgotten, speaking amongst ourselves, that maybe we should just end it, but her boyfriend didn't want to, and it had been about 10 minutes. We ended up chatting amongst each other about anything else, and that ended immediately when her boyfriend and the religious girl started screaming and pointed in the direction where the candle was. They were facing it so they saw it best. They got up, and as we turned to look, we looked over, and what used to be a normal candle wasn't anymore. The flame was about 6 feet in the air and blue. We all screamed and ran upstairs, and the hairs on our necks stood on end. I'd never been so scared. And that's when we heard a low gargling and screaming. We ran out the front door and stood on the front lawn crying. One girl actually wet herself. It was one of the most stressful experiences we've had as friends. Our neighbors almost called the cops, but her mum came running out and was so confused and calmed us down. We never really spoke about it again, it was just scary. But now for the creepy part. Remember the part about Bruce and Kelly? Because we were in junior high, all the teachers were called by their last names. We found out our teacher and his wife were getting divorced because he no longer wore his ring. He had a tan line there, and someone asked if he lost his wedding ring. He mentioned his separation from his wife and quickly changed subject. We later found out his ex's name was Kelly, and his name was Bruce. We were mortified. However, in time it started to fade. I feel memories, scary ones, feel more like dreams. Even a week after it happened, it didn't feel real. Those girls, years later, stopped being friends with me just like predicted. I remember getting a Facebook message from one of them in my mid-20s. She asked me about it. If I lost my virginity at the age it said I would, and if the name of the guy was correct. She informed me that she and the other girl, the religious one, lost it in the way specified. It hit me like a ton of bricks. We were talking years later and I'd almost forgotten the whole thing. Trauma kinda does that to you. We left it there. I think it made us feel safe as adults. Maybe the candle trick wasn't real. Maybe we were just teenagers with creative imaginations and remember it wrong. However, all of that came crashing down. The name the board told me was John, but I didn't lose my virginity with a guy called John. I lost it with a guy from Europe called Jan. But then, that's when I realized, years later, that Jan translated to John in that language, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. For years I struggled with sleep paralysis and nightmares that were very vivid, and it wasn't until years later when I became religious that it really all went away through prayer. Being a religious person now, I'd never mess around with a spirit board. I don't think anyone should. Sometimes I wonder if that's what prompted all my nightmares and the sleep paralysis I struggled with. I was 6 years old. My parents had just divorced. My mum had been raising 3 kids on her own and had gone back to school to do criminal justice classes at Allegheny Community College. It was late '87, and I remember my mum working harder than I'd ever seen anyone work, studying while cooking dinner, taking notes with one hand while trying to fold laundry with the other. I didn't realize it at the time, but she was hanging by a thread. One of her professors saw that. He was kind, charismatic, and lived out in the middle of nowhere in Allegheny County, tucked into the woods because he wanted to disappear. It wasn't until I was older that I understood what that house really meant to him. He was gay, and in that place and in that time, that meant you could keep quiet. But during those Friday night study sessions he hosted, he could breathe, just students, music, coffee, cards, and his own little pocket of safety. My mum took us along sometimes, me, my sister, and our teenage brother. We'd sit in the living room and listen to muffled conversations from the dining room, the occasional burst of laughter and the shuffle of index cards. But there was one night where something changed. We were there like usual. The study session turned into drinks and poker, and everyone was relaxed. That's when my brother said he wanted to show them something, a trick he learned. He grabbed a pack of index cards, a marker, and one of those old red sports drink lids. Flat, translucent plastic. He made a homemade Ouija board, wrote out the alphabet, added yes, no, and put the lid on the center of the table. No one took it seriously. The professor smiled. The adults were a few drinks in. It was just a dumb teenage game. They asked a few questions, laughed, and then something answered. Right away, it said it was a demon, not a ghost, not a little kid pretending, no cryptic riddles. Just the following message. I am a demon. I will be born into this world. There was silence. Someone laughed nervously. Who's gonna birth you? The lid moved deliberately and spelled out Jenny. No one in the room was called Jenny, but two people knew someone with that name. One of those Jennys was pregnant and due soon. That's when the professor stood up, the whole vibe changed. No, we're stopping this now. He made everyone stand in a circle and recite the Lord's Prayer. My sister and I peeked around the corner and watched from the living room. Just kids. We didn't know what was happening, but you could feel the tension in the air, and it made us feel sick. They were holding hands, praying with their eyes closed, but no one was touching the lid, and it moved. The table was old, extended with leaves. The seams were uneven. The lid would catch on the edge, pause and jerk again like it was being pushed with real force. And then it spelled F-U over and over again while the prayer continued. No one broke the circle, no one ran, but you could feel the fear. And when the prayer ended, the lid stopped moving, like a switch had been flipped. And that was it. People just left after that. The night was over. Anyway, a few months later, my mum went back to the professor's house for another late-night study session. A snowstorm hit and he offered her the couch. Late that night, she woke up and saw his rocking chair moving slowly across from her, back and forth and steady. She assumed he'd come out of the bedroom and sat there, watching her for some reason. Weird but not unthinkable. The next morning, she asked casually, "Did you come out last night, sit in the chair?" He blinked. "No. Didn't leave my room. Bathroom's in there, why?" And she said, "The chairs." He told the group a few weeks later that he'd woken up to find every chair in his dining room knocked over, like something had stormed through in the night, but there was no forced entry and no animals. We thought it was just the end of it, but then Jenny came over. The same pregnant Jenny whose name had been spelled out. She hadn't been there that night and didn't know what happened, but someone told her, and her face changed. She'd been using a Ouija board too, alone. She thought she was talking to a child, a lonely little boy, who she felt sorry for. She even said she felt protective. One night the spirit asked Jenny if she could have a hug. She said no. "I'm sorry baby, I can't hug you, you're not really here." 30 seconds later, her toddler son sprinted into her room in tears, asking for a hug. She told us the story while shaking, said she'd been seeing things, flickers at the edge of her vision, something near the ceiling that would vanish when she turned to look, and she thought she was going crazy. Until she found out what was happening at the professor's house. That same week, the same message in 2 different houses, on 2 different makeshift boards, and what appeared to be the same presence. That was my first brush with something I couldn't explain, something no one could explain. I didn't get it at the time, but now as an adult I can't shake it. A red lid, a trembling table, the name of a pregnant woman who wasn't even in the room. I still don't know what it was or what it meant, and I know we let it in. For some backstory, my mum and her sister grew up across the field from two boys. We live in a small city in Montana, so they grew up playing with chickens and swimming in the river. My mum went on to have my little sister Natalie and me, Faye, and one of the boys had twins, Jack and Ben. The twins' grandparents still live across the field from my grandma, so we grew up with each other, spending hours and hours together outside in the fields or down by the river when they'd come visit each summer. Now, I've always had a spooky soul, so when I saw a Ouija board at a local oddity shop, my wheels started turning. At the time, I was probably about 14 and my sister 11-ish. For reference, the twins are my age. Being broke high schoolers, we decided not to purchase the Ouija board, but to make our own. We returned to their grandparents' house, immediately fetched some cardstock markers and a little bit of scotch tape. Before our silly teenage brains could process the weight of what we were doing, the board was made. We justified making it with the following sentiment. They say not to do it in your own house, but none of us technically lived in their grandparents' house, so it should be fine, right? We got some salt from upstairs to make a salt ring, which we painstakingly laid out on a towel so we didn't get any on the basement carpet. None of us are very religious, I'd say spiritual at most, so we googled a protection prayer and Jack read it aloud, and just like that, the four of us put a finger on our DIY planchette, and we were off. I honestly don't remember much about what happened in the basement, aside from talking to a few people. The first of whom identified themselves with initials instead of full names, and a woman whose name I don't seem to recall. They were nice enough, I guess, but all three of them warned about some sort of darker energy on the premises. Like I said, I don't remember a whole lot about it, but I remember we heard a noise and got a little scared. We decided that we were done doing it in the basement after that. Being the silly young people we were, we got freaked out and decided to pause for a little bit. We always made sure to say goodbye, but we were really creeped out by this darker entity. The way the other spirits talked about it made it seem almost like it was controlling them, or had it trapped. We took a break, but something about the board kept calling us back. Later, we went out into the backyard. It was a beautiful sunny day, but we were shrouded by the shadow cast by the house. Against my little sister's better judgment, which honestly we should have listened to, we got the board back out and before we knew it, had contacted something. She said her name was Susan, and eventually we found out she was a nun. We asked where she'd come from and she said Sydney. We weren't sure if Sydney meant Australia, but then Ben chimed in, "Wait, there's a town in Montana called Sydney." We asked if that's what she meant and she confirmed. This is where things took a turn. We asked if she was the evil spirit that the other spirits mentioned. Regretfully, she was, and we started to get scared. My sister wanted nothing more than to be done, but my strong-headed friends and I just kept pushing it further. We began asking about her life. I think we asked how she passed away, which we're not supposed to do. Eventually, one of us asked where she worked or something related to that, and she spelled out a bunch of random letters. Confused, we tried again, same thing. A weird string of letters that looked a little too much like a real word to dismiss. At this point, we were freaked out and ready to be done. We said goodbye, immediately flipped the Ouija board over, too frightened to even look at the thing. While it was still fresh in my mind, I quickly opened the browser on the old Samsung my dad had given me at the start of the pandemic. I typed the letters in, and my skin erupted into goosebumps. Somehow, in a way that defies logic, the letters turned out to be the name of a church in Norway. Remember how she said she was a nun? And how would any of us, 3 high school freshmen and a 6th grader, know the name of a Norwegian church? It's possible that my friends were pranking us, but I've never seen them look so scared before, and I've known them since I was 3. So my friends and I were done at this point. My little sister was white as a ghost. We said goodbye, forbade anything from following us, and promptly set the board on fire. We didn't know that you weren't supposed to do this until afterwards, but I digress. It's been 5 years since then, and thankfully nothing seems to have followed us. But that day taught me a lesson that I'll never forget. You never know what you're dealing with. Who knows what's on the other side of the veil, and who knows who or what is trying to get into our side. And one more thing. It could have just been a scam call, but I recently got a phone call from an unknown number from Sydney, Montana. Normally I don't answer spam calls unless it's to do it in a Russian accent to mess with them. But for some reason, I answered this one. And there was nothing on the other line. I wonder if it's that nun, seeing if she can get me to play again. I was friends with someone who had never experienced the paranormal and was intrigued by my stories. He said he wanted to try a Ouija board to see what would happen. Now, I had only tried once before when I was around 14. My 2 other friends of 12 and 14 and I decided to make our own and use a glass. We agreed not to do it in the house, but the big shed out back. So there we were sitting in the dark, with our fingers on the glass when one friend sneezed and moved the pointer. This resulted in my other friend and me screaming, throwing the glass and bolting outside into the light. Since my friend wanted to try it, I felt like I wanted to have another go as well, especially since it had been 20 years since my last attempt. So I bought a cheap laminated paper board off eBay and went to our park out of town at night. We tried it, but nothing happened. We decided we needed an actual board, so I ordered one made of wood from eBay. While waiting for the delivery, we often went to this park at night to swing on the swings and look at stars, which are more visible out there. One night, a few days before the board was delivered, we went back to the park, and to get there you have to park, walk across the train tracks, and past the train station itself. It's not really a stop for trains anymore, only for events, but a number of coal trains pass through it still. As we walked across, like we had many times before, I reached the platform and suddenly felt something off. Instinctively, I stopped dead in my tracks. I felt like something malicious. I told my friend I wasn't going any further and wanted to leave immediately. He thought I was being dumb, but then noticed the panic on my face. That's when we heard what sounded like a baby crying down the tracks, and he immediately agreed that we should go. As we turned and began walking away, we heard the same thing again, only louder right behind us, but we didn't look back. We just ran to the car and sped off. He was terrified. This was his first experience, and I was terrified because I'd never felt anything like that before. We never went back. When the Ouija board finally arrived, we decided to go somewhere else at sunset to try. This time the pointer actually moved. My friend accused me of moving it, but I told him I wasn't stupid. He decided to tap his fingers on the pointer in a way that wouldn't make it move, just to see if it was moving on its own. I got annoyed and told him that it needed constant energy to move, and he was constantly breaking connection. Eventually he stopped messing around and took it seriously. Now you might be thinking, what if he was moving it? Or what if I was? Well, we used our phones as a light source when the sun is set. When you moved the pointer yourself, it made a slight noise as it slid across the board. But when it was moving on its own, you could see the light from our phones passing under the pointer, as if it were hovering just above the board and made no sound at all. Back to what happened. The board first started counting down from 9. We knew if that happened, we needed to say goodbye, so we did. Then it started moving again and answering our questions. We asked if it was a ghost and it said no. We asked if it was a spirit and it said yes. We asked its name and it said it had no name. We asked about the thing in the other park and it warned us not to go back there because it was evil. Safe to say I never did go back, nor did I want to. I'm no longer friends with this person, so I don't know if they ever returned, but I never will. About a month later, I was discussing this incident with a few colleagues from work, and they told me the train station used to be a camp for workers when the tracks were being built back in the day. Families used to live there, and apparently young children would sometimes wander off and fall into wombat holes and would never be found. After learning that, I no longer went stargazing at dark and isolated parks out of town. Even just remembering this has freaked me out, but I'm glad to share this story. Thanks for listening. I grew up in a pretty rural part of northern British Columbia. If you know, you know. Snow half the year, roads you probably shouldn't be driving on, and trailers that barely count as shelter in the winter. One of my close friends, Nikki, lived out in the woods a bit. Her mom was a bartender, and since bars in town didn't close until like 4 a.m., she was home alone a lot. Her trailer was rough. The foundation had sunk so much the place was lopsided, the pipes were always frozen, and the heater couldn't keep up with the cold. The windows constantly had ice on the inside, not just frost, but actual ice. And we were 14 when this happened. One night, one of Nikki's boyfriends brought over a Ouija board and dared everyone to try it. Classic teenage horror movie setup, right? Most of the group was too cool to admit that they were nervous, but I was a certified chicken. I had never even tried Bloody Mary before, and I wasn't going to mess with the spirit world. So while they set it up in the living room, I dipped into the little back room where they kept their rabbits. They raised them for fur and meat, which already had a weird vibe to it, but whatever. It wasn't exactly warm in there, but it was better than being in the living room with a glorified spirit radio. Nikki's little sister came too, so it was just the two of us and the rabbits. Every now and then we'd hear shouting and laughing from the other room. But we were fine, until Nikki came in still laughing and brought the Ouija board with her. She pulled out one of the smaller rabbits, just a small little puffball, and put it on the board. She was hysterical, laughing like it was all a big joke. The rabbit sat there for a few seconds completely still, and then it rolled over and just died. There was no noise, no sudden spasm, just gone. Now, if you've ever raised rabbits, you know that they can sometimes die from fright, literally heart attack it happens, but the timing, the setting, the intention behind what she said. Nikki swears to this day that they had just asked the board to show how strong the spirit was, to prove it really could do something, and then she brought that rabbit in. I called my mum and told her that if she didn't come pick me up, I'd walk home alone in the middle of the night. I didn't care about the moose or the roads, I wasn't staying. I didn't go back for months, not until summer where the sun barely goes down at all, and the dark feels a little less heavy. Even then, I never returned in winter. And that trailer still creeps me out. I don't care what anyone says about coincidence or science. That night, I know something answered, and whatever it was wanted to be taken seriously. This story was told to me by my late father, and it stayed with me ever since. He wasn't the type to exaggerate or entertain nonsense. He was a priest for over 30 years, but before that had served in the military. He'd seen war, he'd seen death, and he believed deeply in the existence of both good and evil. One of the parishes he worked at was in a small wooded town in northern Pennsylvania, close enough to state forest land that homes were scattered and quiet at night. My dad had gotten to know a few of the local police officers there. It was a small community, the sort of place where everyone was on a first-name basis. And one night in late autumn, he got a call from one of these officers. The tone was strange, not panicked exactly, but serious. The officer asked him to come out to a house just outside of town. It had started as a routine noise complaint. A few young guys in their early 20s had been staying at the house for the weekend, just messing around drinking, and apparently trying to contact spirits with a Ouija board. But something had gone wrong. When the police arrived, they didn't find a bunch of drunk kids being rowdy. They found one of the boys screaming in a language no one could understand, clawing at his arms, trying to get into the crawl space under the house. The others were terrified and had locked themselves in an upstairs bathroom, and one had dialed 911. The boy who had lost it, Jamie, was taken by ambulance and later transferred to a psychiatric facility. According to the officers, he didn't stop screaming until he was sedated, and he remained in that facility for over a year. The police didn't know what to make of the situation, but something about the house was wrong, and that's why they called Dad. They didn't need him to arrest anyone, they needed spiritual counseling. My dad agreed to go, though he admitted later he nearly turned around halfway there. He didn't know why, but the further he drove out of town, the heavier his chest felt. He arrived to find the house mostly cleared out, just 2 officers still inside, both of whom looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. The moment he stepped over the threshold, he knew something wasn't right. He would later tell me that it was the only time in his life, military or clergy, that he had truly felt afraid. He said the air inside the house felt thick, not hot, not cold, just heavy, like walking underwater. He didn't hear anything, not even the usual creaks of an old house. And something else, something he could never quite describe, was there. He found the Ouija board in the center of the living room, the planchette still resting in the middle. No one had touched it since. He said he didn't dare try to move it. He said instead, he reached into his coat and took out a small warm book which he always carried with him, his prayer manual. After he passed, it was left to me. The cover is cracked and the pages are soft and creased with age, but there's one page that's marked more than others. The page with the cleansing prayer that he read that night. He said it aloud in full, slowly, clearly, hands shaking. He told me his breath was visible even though the house was warm, and the officer stood behind him completely silent. When he finished, the heaviness started to lift. It wasn't dramatic, no sudden rush of air or lights flickering, but like something let go. He described it like the feeling when your ear pops after pressure builds, just a release. He didn't stay long after that. He told the officers to have the board destroyed properly and advised they never return to the house unless absolutely necessary. He never saw Jamie again, but he heard from one of the cops months later that he still wasn't the same. He didn't remember the incident at all, just bits and pieces, but he was afraid of the dark after that, and couldn't sleep with the lights on or be left alone. The last thing my dad ever said to me about that night was this: "If you take one piece of advice from me, just one, never use a Ouija board. Don't mess with doors you're not prepared to close." I've never touched one, and never will. About 8 years ago, my friend and I carelessly messed with a Ouija board. It was homemade, so I really wasn't expecting it to work, and we used it multiple times throughout the week. Pretty much immediately we had success and spoke with many spirits, nothing too interesting, but gained some credibility with them when they answered questions such as when my home was built, who lived there prior and such. I was still a bit skeptical, so we decided to ask the board what my friend's, the other one using the board with me, middle name was, which I did not know at the time. She closed her eyes and looked up, so I knew she wasn't able to see the board, and what do you know, it spells out her middle name. At this point, we were both convinced and thrilled by these experiences. And this is the part that freaks me out. We got in contact with something and asked who we were speaking with. The response was ZO and then Mama. I'd tried forgetting about this experience, so I don't recall everything that happened in this encounter, but I remember it was messing with us somehow, and we were just really easily confused with what was happening. Suddenly the planchette starts darting across the board, going through the alphabet, then aggressively making figure eights. It felt so intense and aggressive we did a little research prior and knew that it wasn't a good thing. We were yelling goodbye, but it just kept making the figure eights, until the planchette was forced off the board and toppled over. So basically we encountered Zozo had the figure eights and knocked the planchette off the board without saying goodbye and closing communication. It was all fun and games for us until this happened and we got so serious and silent. I immediately ripped the board, buried the pieces separately in the woods. I'm not sure if this is okay to do, I just panicked. We actually had videos of this, but I immediately deleted them to get rid of any connection to this experience. We never talked about it since it happened, and I tried to never think about it, but it's really been bugging me lately for some reason. I can't think of any paranormal happening afterwards, but the house we did it in seemed haunted in some way to begin with. Anyway, I no longer live there. Is this something I should worry about? I'm sure it's fine since nothing really happened to us afterwards, but I just worry since we kind of all did wrong things. About 2 years ago, my nana brought home a Ouija board she found at a yard sale. I've always been a firm believer in the paranormal. It's been one of my deepest interests for as long as I can remember, so naturally I knew better than to mess with one of those things. I've read enough stories, seen enough documentaries, and heard too many warnings to think it was just a game. My nana, though, total skeptic. She thought it would be fun for me, my younger brother and our oldest cousin, to play with it. I wanted nothing to do with it, the sight of it alone unsettled me. So I left it sitting on the dining room table for a few days, hoping she'd forget about it or decide to toss it. But no such luck. She eventually told me to put it away, so I slid it under my bed and tried to forget about it. My brother, who was 11 at the time and cousin of 12, kept begging to use it. I told them no over and over again. I tried explaining why it wasn't just a game, but they were typical preteen boys. If you tell them not to do something, they have to do it. Then one day I came home from work, and something just felt off. You know when you just know someone's been in your stuff? I checked under the bed and sure enough the board was there. But I had this weird feeling in my gut, something was wrong. I went downstairs and asked them straight up if they'd used it. At first they denied it, but I saw through them immediately. Eventually they admitted they had played with it, and I asked if they said goodbye when they were done, which, as most people familiar with Ouija boards know, is important. And they swore they had. Now my cousin has a habit of being dramatic. He exaggerates and makes up stories for fun. So when he started telling me about a couple of weird things that supposedly happened while they were playing, I didn't believe a word of it. I figured it was either him being over the top or them messing with each other. A few nights later I went to bed. As I was trying to fall asleep, I suddenly got that heavy, uncomfortable feeling of being watched. I glanced over at my closet that has 2 sliding doors, and one of them was cracked open just a sliver, just enough to creep me the hell out. I turned over to face the wall and tried ignoring the feeling. Eventually I fell asleep. Then bam, I jolted awake. Something had hit me in the back of the head. Not a light tap, but a solid thump. I was lying on my back, so the back of my head was on my pillow, and there was no way to explain how anything could have made contact there. My whole body was shaking. I sat up, looked around, and saw nothing. And then my floor creaked. Not once. It creaked again and again, as if someone or something was slowly walking in a circle around my bed. I was terrified and frozen. I lay there for what felt like forever, heart pounding in my ears until I finally mustered the courage to grab my phone and bolt out the room. I sat on the couch in the living room clutching my phone trying to calm down. The back of my head still had this weird, tingling, pulsing sensation. I checked the time. 3 a.m. I tried calling my boyfriend, now husband. I was crying and completely shaken. He didn't pick up. I called him maybe 15 times before finally giving up. I sat in the chair, lights on, jumping at every little sound until my nana woke up at around 6. But I didn't tell her what happened. She wouldn't have believed me anyway. Later that morning I called my boyfriend again, and this time he did pick up. His phone had been on silent and he felt terrible for missing my calls. He said he would have come over in a heartbeat had he known. That same day he came over, we took the Ouija board to the junkyard and got rid of it for good. And since that night nothing else has happened. No creaks, no weird feelings, no more being woken up by invisible hits to the head. I didn't tell anyone else in my family, just him. And to this day, I still don't know exactly what was in that room with me. But I do know this: Ouija boards are not a game, and don't mess with them. Ever. I've always been a little attuned to the supernatural. Not a full-on medium or anything, but sensitive. When I was 18, I made a mistake I'll never forget. That was the night I opened the door that I wasn't ready to deal with. There were 5 of us hanging out in the backyard of my friend's house. It was one of those chilly, late summer nights that was quiet, and one of my friends brought out a glow-in-the-dark Ouija board. I was both terrified and deeply curious. My mother is devoutly religious and had always forbidden me from going anywhere near one of those boards. She told me they were dangerous, and they could let things in you couldn't easily be rid of. But I was 18, stubborn and curious, and agreed to participate. We sat around the board giggling and asking dumb questions at first. Who will I marry? What's the name of my cellmate? But nothing was happening. There were no movement or answers at all. The planchette sat resolutely still. But a few minutes later, something changed. I'm not really sure how to explain it, but the air shifted. My chest got tight, my hands started to tremble violently, like my body knew something my mind hadn't caught up to yet. Of course, my friends laughed and teased me. Oh my god, you're so dramatic. But I wasn't playing around. I couldn't even look up from the board. And that's when I heard it. A deep, ragged breath right in my ear. Not just a sound. It felt like someone was leaning in close, too close, exhaling directly into my skin. I was sitting next to my friend Megan, but she was at least a foot away and definitely wasn't breathing like that. In my head, I kept repeating for the thing, whatever it was, to go away, and eventually it did. The weight lifted. But I didn't tell anyone what happened. I couldn't. I sat there frozen, pretending everything was fine while my heart tried to escape out my chest. Later that night, when we all started heading home, I begged Megan to sleep over. I knew whatever had breathed into my ear hadn't stayed in the backyard, but felt it probably had attached itself to me. I casually asked her if she'd heard anything strange during the session, and she looked at me like I was insane. What are you talking about? No. She thought I was making it up, but I wasn't. The haunting began that night. For the next month, the house felt wrong. I couldn't sleep without every light on in my room and music blasting in my headphones. It didn't matter though. Every single night like clockwork, I heard footsteps pacing back and forth outside my bedroom door. Sometimes they stopped right outside, like whoever or whatever it was were deciding whether or not to come in. And then there was the 3 a.m. thing. Every night I'd wake up at exactly 3 a.m. I'd just jolt awake, as if I had been yanked out of a dream. I didn't tell my mum. She'd be furious if she found out I'd disobeyed her and used a Ouija board. But then one morning, after a particularly sleepless night, she sat me down at the kitchen table and said, "Ashley, what the hell's going on in this house?" I froze. "Nothing," I lied. "Nothing's going on." She stared at me. "Don't lie to me. For the past month I've been hearing footsteps in the hallway, and last night something scratched my foot while I was sleeping." And then I broke down. I started crying, told her everything about the Ouija board, the breath in my ear, the nightmares, and the footsteps. She didn't yell. She just stood up, went to the cabinet, and pulled out the sage. Together we saged the entire house room by room. She recited prayers, doused corners with holy water, and I swear I felt the air change again. It felt lighter, like whatever it was had finally left. Since that night, things have never been the same, not in a bad way, just different. The footsteps stopped, the 3 a.m. wake-up stopped, and the house felt safe again. But I've been more sensitive ever since. I feel things more. Sometimes I still dream about people I've never met who died long ago. And here's the thing. We found out not long after that someone had taken their own life in the house where we used the board. A man in the basement years before. So if you ever wondered if Ouija boards really work, let me be clear. They do. And the worst part is they don't always talk to you through the board. Sometimes they just whisper in your ear. I hope you take this story as a warning. This happened in one of my last years of high school. I was friends all throughout school with a girl called Alice. She was your typical Hermione, super smart, really attentive in class, and had the answers to nearly everything. But when she turned about 15, something inside her changed. She was still smart, but suddenly she adopted this goth persona, started coming dressed all in black, dyed her hair, painted her nails, wore goth bracelets, etc. It was a rather startling change that honestly came out of nowhere. I was into that kind of music at the time, but never really bothered dressing up. She, however, went the whole hog. Nothing really changed about her, at least not in terms of our friendship. But one day when I invited her over, which wasn't unusual, she brought along a Ouija board that she'd picked up in a charity shop. I had never seen one before. I mean, I'd heard of them, who hasn't, and I was a bit reluctant to use it. But she insisted that it was just a toy, nothing more, and explained the ideomotor effect, and wanted me to use it with her just to prove how it was a load of old nonsense. I reluctantly agreed. She brought it out and placed it on the coffee table in my house. Now, for context, so some important context is needed here. My mother sadly passed away when I was around 5, so for the longest time it had just been me and my dad. My dad's always struggled to find quality employment, and at the time was working night shifts. He, as it happened, had had to cover someone else's shift that day, and was working an exceptionally long amount of time. It must have been around 5 in the afternoon. He'd already left, and I wasn't expecting to see him, if I even got to, until the morning. So Alice pulls the Ouija board out of the box. She places it on the table and puts the planchette on top, and explains that we both put 2 fingers on the planchette, and that it will move around and give messages. Cool beans, I say, and we start. I rest my fingers on the planchette, expecting it to be dragged around and get some spooky message from the beyond. I'm not gonna lie, I was half hoping to get something from my mum, but no such luck. For a while, we get absolutely no movement whatsoever. We look at each other and start giggling. There's nothing happening. So, after a while, Alice gives up and just leaves it on the table. I go get some snacks and we turn on the TV. But after a few episodes of boring TV shows and hardly any chatter, she asks if we want to give it another go. And I agree, thinking at this point there really is nothing supernatural about it. It's quite literally just a block of wood with some letters on it. And so this time I place my fingers on it, not expecting anything. But suddenly, I feel a jolt, and my hand begins to move under the planchette. I look up at Alice and insist she's doing it, which would make sense, seeing as she was the one who was pushing us to have another go. But she insists she isn't. Now, Alice isn't a very good liar. She's never been good at acting whatsoever, and looks at me with a kind of dumbstruck horror. Like I was doing it and then blaming her for doing it. We both look at each other, trying to read the situation, and look down, curiously, to see what's being spelled. Just one word. Open. It's spelled once. It's spelled again. At that point I remove my fingers and tell her it's not funny, and I don't even understand what she's trying to do. She insists she's having no involvement in this whatsoever, and we both kind of give each other side-eye. I tell her I don't want to play anymore. I'm not finding it very fun. And she agrees. So we put it back in the box, go back to watching TV. And later in the evening, she goes home, I warm up some food in the microwave and kind of forget about the whole thing. Now, for any of you who've been listening properly, you'll probably notice that we never said goodbye. I'm gonna be honest, I don't think either of us at the time knew this was an important step in the whole Ouija ritual. But as you'll soon find out, it was something we had to learn the hard way. Or, well, me. So I go to bed, and I sleep. One thing about me is that I sleep like the dead. Once I'm asleep, I don't think anything can really wake me up. I've slept through several large storms, our house nearly burning down, and my dad trying to jolt me awake. It really takes a lot to disturb my slumber. I was at school when I received a funny text from my dad. "Is everything alright at home?" That was weird. I tell him that everything was fine, but that I was at school, and ask him what's up. He says he heard footsteps in the hallway outside his room while he was trying to sleep, and wondered if I'd come home early, but didn't want to get out of bed as he was absolutely exhausted. I didn't really think on it much at the time. I was in the middle of a lesson and really shouldn't have had my phone out anyway, so put my phone away, didn't think much on the messages, assumed my dad was just exhausted given his double shift, and carried on. But from that day on we started hearing weird stuff in the house. There'd be times where I'd come home and I'd hear what I swore would be whispers from upstairs. But as I would make my way towards the stairs to listen better, suddenly they'd all cut off, as if they were an audio recording that had just been switched off, and I could never really make out the words. It all came to a head though a few weeks later. It was a Saturday. My dad and I had an outing planned around the middle of the day, and I was just watching TV downstairs while he was just trying to get the last few hours sleep he needed before we would go out. That's when I heard something from upstairs, a faint knocking. Why is my dad knocking? I thought to myself. I ignored it, but then the knocking happened again. Was this some kind of joke? I make my way up the stairs, not thinking anything of it, and when I get to the top, I look out onto the hallway. There are just 3 doors, mine, my dad's, and the toilet at the bottom in the middle. I observe. All 3 doors are closed, and then I hear it, the knocking, coming from one of the doors. 3 loud raps. The thing is, it must be coming from inside one of the doors, I tell myself, and seeing as there's no one home but me and my dad, it must be coming from his room. I look at my watch. It's about 11. He should probably be getting up anyway. So I open the door, but my dad isn't behind the door. He's sitting bolt upright in his bed, staring at the door, and as I open it, he flinches and says, "Oh, it's only you. Why were you knocking like that? You were scaring the crap out of me." I look down at him and tell him I hadn't been knocking at all, but that I'd been downstairs watching TV, assumed it was him, and came up because I assumed he was knocking and being weird. We stare at each other in disbelief. And then the memory of the Ouija board hits me, and I wonder if open was some kind of message or instruction, and I start to freak out. I tell my dad everything, and explain that it had only started with the board. So, I call my friend Alice, invite her over, and she pulls out the board again. And I insist that we do the whole thing again, but this time say goodbye. I wasn't sure if it would work, but I'm grateful to say that after we did that, things stopped happening around the house. My dad could get proper sleep, and all the spooks seemed to disappear. I want to say it was my mum, but I don't think it was. Who knows what it was? I, for one, never want to use a Ouija board again. I don't know if Alice still has it or not. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope that you have enjoyed tonight's collection of scary stories. They certainly have been an interesting bunch. If you would like your story shared on the channel, feel free to email it to me to themortismedia@gmail.com, and if you'd like extra exclusive perks from me, feel free to follow the link in the description to Patreon. Which reminds me, I'd like to give an extra special thanks to my members and patrons whose names can be seen on the screen for their continued financial support. It really does make a huge difference, guys. Thank you. And if you'd like to see even more from me, follow the links on screen now. But that's it from me. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.